Happy New Year and welcome to the first installment of our tutorial series for the Berroco Mystery Blanket Knit Along. So I'm Jana with Purl Together, and I'm going to be with you throughout the whole year as we knit this blanket together. In January, we'll have 2 blocks. So this video is just for the very first block, and you can expect a video in a couple weeks for block number 2. So we're going to keep it manageable and go step by step throughout the whole thing. This whole series is designed to be very beginner friendly. So if you're just a brand new knitter, welcome, and you can follow along. I have lots of technique videos to show you, and all of those will be linked in the video description down below. The first thing I want to do is give a great big thank you and a big shout out to Berroco Yarns for sending me the yarn that I'm using to film these videos for you with. So thank you so much for that. I chose the neutral colorway because it goes with everything and I have trouble deciding. If you're wondering, this is a shawl I made several years ago. I'll put the link for this down below. It's just acrylic yarn, and this is before I started using more natural fibers. This is called, I think, the Sprig of Hope shawl by Robin West. Link is down below in the video description for that as well. And people always ask, so that's why I like to say what I'm wearing. It's chilly here in Wyoming, and we live in an old farmhouse, and so it's a little cold in my office today. Before we get started, I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to all the people who have joined the Purl Together patron community in the last few weeks. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Your monthly pledges make this possible for me to keep doing this each and every week. So we've had a bunch of people join in December. So the first batch, I'm going to do this in a couple of batches so it doesn't take quite so long. But the first several people that joined, thank you so much for your pledges to Nicole, Corey, Sharon, Sylvia, Julie, and Wheezy. Again, thanks for joining the Purl Together patron community. If you're interested in seeing what I'm offering for your monthly pledges, including exclusive members-only videos, discounts on classes that I offer, and a community, you can head over to patreon.com/Purl Together. The first thing we're going to do is swatch. And before everybody starts groaning and complaining, let me explain to you why this is really important. Swatching, particularly for a large project like this, is super important because you're going to put in a whole bunch of hours and hours knitting this, and also the cost of the yarn, obviously. So you want it to turn out the way that you expect it to. So to ensure that, the purpose of swatching is to make sure that you have the same stitches per inch and rows per inch that the designer intended for you to have. And that way all your blocks will come out to be roughly that 12 inches. Now, if you have one that's 11.5 inches or maybe 12.25 or whatever, our blocks are going to be flexible. So we'll be able to ease that in and make that work when we seam all the blocks together. But if you can minimize the number of times that you have to fuss with that, that would certainly be more ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little swatch in pattern. And the reason that's important is because particularly these first couple of blocks that we have, they are knit and purl texture. And so when you purl and you transition from a knit stitch to a purl stitch and the other way around, you're bringing the yarn forward and then back. And that changes the amount of yarn that each stitch uses. And so what'll happen then is that affects your number of stitches per inch. So it's important to swatch and then block it, soak it, get it wet for a few minutes, and then block it, so that you know how the yarn's going to behave. Whatever yarn you choose, whether that's the Berroco Vintage, which is a wool acrylic blend with a little nylon, or you're using all wool or even hand spun, depending on your fibers, you want to know how that yarn's going to behave and whether it's going to bloom and blossom up, and that each stitch will like get a little bigger, and that changes your number of stitches per inches. So I hope that makes sense. So I'll walk you through how to go about that. Also, it gives you an opportunity to test out the pattern a little bit and make sure you know what to expect before you knit the bigger block. That way you'll know how to navigate the pattern. You can kind of have a preview and troubleshoot anything. You can ask questions, and that will minimize any frogging or tinking. If you're a brand new knitter, tinking just is knitting backwards or unknitting. Tink is knit spelled backwards. Frogging is when you're having to rip it, rip it, rip it, right? And you're literally pulling out rows. Okay, that's ripping back. And then frogging an entire project is when you're going to frog the whole block. So I just did this little swatch. It's about probably 1/4 to 1/3 the size of my actual block. And I can use this if I need to. I'll explain the little loop here. You'll see that shortly. But I can use this yarn if I need to, or if I just want to. Or maybe I'm going to make a bunch of little ones of the little swatches and make a miniature version of leftovers if I don't need them later for my cat. Or Barbie blankets, whatever. You get the idea. So hang on to these. You might use them, you might not use them. That's entirely up to you. If you're a brand new knitter, we're going to do the long tail cast on. That's usually the first cast on that you use. I'm going to show you how I prefer to do it, but I also have a more specific video that I'll link down below in the description to get you started. I also have a long tail cast on calculator. So if you're wondering how much yarn you need to cast on, that will help you. Links down below. Let's get started on our swatch because, as you know, swatching is the first step to any project. Okay, we're going to be swatching today with whatever your main color is. I normally use my Chagu needles, but today I'm using the Knit Pro Karbonz. I'm going to swatch with the US 7 or 4.5 millimeter. If you are new to the long tail cast on, I'll put a link to a video down below in the video description that has a little bit slower version of what we're going to do. You can start out with a slip knot if you want to, or you can just simply make a loop with the folding over like that, with the working yarn coming from the top and the tail on the bottom. Now, if you want to know how long your tail should be, there's a mathematical way to figure that out. And I have a whole video on that too, which I will link down below in the video description, and a long tail cast on calculator, so you don't have to be guessing about that. So all I'm going to do is I make my triangle like this, and I go up through the bottom of that, do your normal counterclockwise wrap, and put the loop over the top. We want the swatch to be representational of what the pattern's going to look like in the end. So if we look at row 1, you're going to start off with knit 5, and then you're going to do that a number of times, repeating what's in between here, and then you're going to end with a knit 1. So what's in between here, between these asterisks, is 8 stitches, and then I have a knit 1 here and a knit 5 here. So that's going to be some multiple of 8 plus 6 stitches. So hopefully that makes sense. So 62, and we have repeats of 8, a total of 7 times. So you do this once and repeat it 6 times more, so that means 7 times total. So that's 56 stitches plus 1 here and 5 here. So 56 plus 6 is 62. So that's how they arrived at that. So I'm going to cast on 30. So I have 24 here plus these 6 extra makes 30 stitches. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so I have my 30 stitches here, and I'm just going to go ahead and begin. So this is row 1, and after I get established a little bit, I will put a marker to denote the right side of my work. So if you're a beginner, RS means right side. I like to take the tail and kind of hold it back out of my way and, you know, bring it off to the left so that it doesn't get tangled up with my working yarn. And then we're just going to do exactly what the instructions tell us and knit 5. Okay, so go in. All right, now we're ready to do purl 4, so don't forget to bring your yarn forward. Purl 4. We're just going to carry on doing exactly what the instructions tell us, repeating the purl 4, knit 4 that's between the asterisks. And you can always look back and double check. 1, 2, 3, 4 of the purl bumps right there. And then we have 4 knit stitches. So if you're a beginner, learning to read your knitting will always be helpful. If the phone rings or you have to set your knitting down and or you're talking to someone, and you can go back and read your knitting and double check where you are if you get interrupted. All right, now I have finished, I'm almost done with my 3rd repeat of the stitches between the asterisks, and I should have 1 stitch left after I do the purl one stitch left after I do the knit four, and I have one stitch left. Okay, so that was row 1, that's on the right side, and now you're going to turn your work over and knit the instructions on the wrong side. Right, I'm going to knit the instructions on the wrong side, and being mindful to double count each repeat and make sure I'm on track. I'll show you what it looks like when I get a few rows in. Okay, I've knitted my square for my swatch, and for me that ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4 repeats of the 8 rows. So 32 rows altogether. And that's a good section to measure with. So I'm going to go with that. Let me show you what I like to do for my swatches. Now I just did this standard cast on, long tail cast on. You can see how that's a little scrunched up. So I'm not going to measure down here because you want the stitches, you want to be able to measure at several places throughout the swatch, and you want the stitches not to be distorted by a cast on or a bind off. So what I've done here is just cut a tail that's probably 8 or 10 inches long, and all I'm going to do is put this yarn into a darning needle or a tapestry needle, and then I'm just going to slip it through all of these stitches. So the reason I'm doing that instead of a standard bind off is I don't want any of my stitches here to be distorted for measuring, but also, and more importantly, since I have plenty of space in the center of the swatch to measure, but I want to make this easy to get out in the event I need my yarn. I'm pretty sure I have plenty of yarn for all of the blocks I'm going to need for my project, but I'm just going to show you this for future use. Just make note of that. If you know, it's just easier to get this out if you need to unravel it to use it later. Now, inevitably the question comes up, can you reuse yarn that's been soaked and blocked? Yes, absolutely. Sure. I'm going to give that a little tug so that I take up this. I'm going to leave a little bit of a loop right here in case I do need to take it out. I can just grab that and pull on it. There you go. Now what I'm going to do is take a preliminary measurement knowing this will not be the final measurement, but I want to make a note of this and write this down so that I have an idea of how this yarn is going to behave and how much it might bloom once I soak it. So I have my handy Susan Bates knit check, but I'll tell you why I don't care for it so much. When I put this down, I'm only measuring 2 inches here in this little window, and that's fine, but I'd rather use a ruler, and I'd rather measure until I get a whole stitch on a whole inch. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, first thing is I want to start my measurement right here on this line, not the end of the ruler, because that is a little bit off. Secondly, I know that these are knits and purls, and so I can usually just start measuring here at a knit stitch. And I know there's 4 across this block. And then the other thing you want to do with purls, when you're measuring purl bumps, each bump is a stitch. So think of a purl bump, like let's look at these right here. Think of purl bumps as you either have an umbrella or a smile. You want to measure across here, measuring the umbrellas. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, not both. Okay, measure one or the other, either umbrellas or smiles, but not both. Does that make sense? So I know that I have 4 stitches here, and then I have an umbrella that's tucked under right there, so 5, and maybe like a quarter, but I'm not going to count that yet. I'm not going to consider that I have 5 1/4 stitches per inch. I'm going to keep counting until I end with a whole stitch on a whole inch. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 in 3 inches. So that would be 5 1/3 stitches per inch. So my gauge is a little bit off, a little bit. So if I want to adjust that, I would go up a needle size, because right now I have 16 in 3 inches instead of 15. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, it could make a difference exponentially over many, many blocks and a bigger project. What I'm going to do is go ahead and soak this and block it and see what changes. But I'm going to write that down that I got 16 in 3 inches with a US 7 or 4.5 millimeter. That's 5.3 stitches per inch, which is a little bit too many stitches per inch. So I need to go up a needle size to make the stitches slightly bigger. But this yarn could certainly bloom enough to account for that. Now, if I choose not to change my needle size, what could happen is my blanket could end up being a little smaller than maybe I would like. So let's block this, soak it, block it, and let it dry. All right, all I've done here is put my little swatch in some water, and I did put a tiny little bit of soak in there. Soak doesn't require rinsing, so I don't want to rinse it too much, so I just put a tiny little drop in there just in case there's any oils from my hand. It's really not necessary too if you just use warm water, and we're going to let it sit for about 15-20 minutes. Okay, I got the swatch out of the water, and I just squeezed it with one hand to get the majority of the water out, and now I'm just going to roll it up in a dish towel and then press it to get more water out before I put it on my blocking mat. All right, my swatch is pretty well dry, so I'm going to measure again and take note of how things may have changed. Before I measure, though, obviously you're going to want to unpin this so it will spring back if it's going to. If your swatch shrinks when you unpin it, then it's not fully dry. So let's see if things are going to change at all when I unpin it. I think it's pretty well dry here. It's looking pretty good, not changing much. So great. Let's go ahead and remeasure this and see what our gauge changed. See how our gauge changed, if at all. So I think the yarn bloomed a little bit. So remember, I had 5 1/3 stitches, or 16 stitches in 3 inches. So let's double check that here. Get something to point with here. I'm just going to use one of these pins. So again, I have 4 stitches across each section. You zoom in here, and I'm going to make sure that the edge of this knit stitch is right here on this line, not at the edge of the ruler, but on this line here. So 4, 8, 12, and I'm counting the umbrellas here, 12, 13, 14, 15. Look at that, right on the money. See there? So that's awesome. Let me move this up a little bit. Let's count this again. All right, so let's count. Each section is 4 stitches, so we have 4 here, measuring from the very first line, not the edge of the ruler. So we have 4, 8, 12, and then I'm counting umbrellas, not smiles. So 12, 13, 14, 15. So I'm right on the money. Right there. 15 for 3 inches because I want to complete a whole stitch at a whole inch, and that would be right at 5 stitches per inch. So I'm going to go with that needle size. Now, had I not got the results that I wanted, I would just adjust my needle size and re-knit my swatch. It's worth doing, just so that you know that your afghan is going to be to the size that you expect. Okay, as I showed you before I completed my swatch, I have now moved on to my full square, and I'm working through that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to post in the Purl Together Facebook group or the Ravelry group. The Berroco Makers group is a wonderful resource as well. Alison Green did a Facebook Live this morning in that group. I'll put the link for that down below, and she answered a whole bunch of people's questions, as well as gave some tips also. She has a video to correspond with this block about reading the charts for this first month. So I'll link that below as well. There's 2 videos that you should be aware of if you're new to reading charts. One is the one for this specific block. And then I also have a more general video about reading knitting charts. I'll put both those links down below. But be sure to go watch Alison's video for the blocks this month, as well as her Facebook Live. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing your finished blocks on Instagram and Ravelry. If you're posting on Instagram, I would love it if you would tag me there so I can see your colors that you've chosen and see your knitting at Purl_together. Also, be sure to use the hashtags that Berroco has designated on Ravelry. Tag your project with vintage MKAL 25. They're offering some prizes at the end of this, and so you'll want to tag that on Ravelry so that they'll see your project and you'll be eligible for that. Also, tag them on Instagram. They'll love to see your projects also. All right, thanks for watching and happy knitting this weekend.